A Science of Change, podcasting by Greg Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. All right, so welcome back, everyone. We are live with yet another podcast interview. This is Greg Crosby, and I have today with me the extreme pleasure of talking to my cousin, Greg Crosby, who is about a decade my elder and is a renowned, internationally known speaker on neuroscience and behavioral science. Independent of my father, well, maybe not entirely independent. We're about to find out, but he's led his own life journey down the social science path. And so, Greg, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's good to hear you, Gil. We live in two opposite ends of the nation. Gil in Delaware or in Maryland, and I in
Delaware.
Oregon. Oh, Delaware, and I am in Oregon. The main thing I do in my work is I integrate therapy and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about this, it's interesting to think about the family history of it. And if I look at my mother's side of the family, both were both my grandparents and were college educated. Mm-hmm. So my grandpa was in the second graduating class of Ohio State University in 1911 in the field of science and agriculture. And then my grandmother on my mother's side was in the 1915 Wesleyan University class in Ohio, Wesleyan College in Ohio, for business. So they coupled. I have their love letters that they gave me, and they coupled and formed the first male-female partnership of agricultural business working in grain elevators in Ohio.
Nice.
Which is still there today. And so, but each of them had their liberal arts orientation. They all liked history. They all liked literature. They were interested in the budding field of social science. They were very much involved in business and the science of agriculture. And on both sides of my family, you have these unique histories in the background before us. And even before our parents that have influenced this.
As you know, your father's father,
yes,
was a blue-collar worker in Pittsburgh. But grandmother and grandfather Crosby were totally committed to their kids getting educated.
Yes, and they were very committed themselves, I think, Gil, to learning. Mm-hmm. And so they Grandpa and Grandma Crosby would always be filled with excitement about what they're learning, like what they read in the paper. They were interested in business and international relations. They would talk to me about that as a little kid. They were fascinated about people. And Grandpa was fascinated with how things worked, but also how things did not work in systems, because he worked in a big system in the Monongahela Railroad. Grandmother was really, I think, the classic T group leader. She was always checking your process at the table.
Okay.
And so that's no accident to me that your father ends up running tea groups because she was looking at the micro expressions of us all at the table and picking up if we were satisfied or dissatisfied and checking it out.
That makes sense. And I had the good fortune of, I even lived with her for a portion of a school year when I was in my early 20s. So I got to know her in a way I never got to know grandfather Crosby. He had passed away. And then comes the scientific brain of Gilmore Crosby, the man I was named after, your father.
Yes. And when we talk about families and particular interests, it just is fascinating, the ripple effects through families about science. And Dad just loved chemistry. And I think from a very early age, but he was also into music, as many of the people in the Crosby side of the family were. And he, by the time he graduated from college, which was in 1943, he was offered an Eastman Kodak job. And Eastman Kodak was a cover for the Manhattan Project.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took that job and moved right away to Rochester, New York to get trained. And then he was aware of the Manhattan Project, but not what they were doing. He was in, only 1% of the people knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But he figured this out probably within 2 months after entering Oak Ridge in June of 1943. And he stayed there until August of 1945 when the bomb was dropped. He particularly was supervising the Y-12 uranium enhancement plant.
Mm-hmm.
This was his first job. And really out of college, that was of major professional import. So I think what Dad did, I mean, he's only, I think, 23.
Mm-hmm.
Is he figured it out, because he figured out what was going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, most people believed that the bomb was being focused on Nazi Germany, and that's where we would, if we used it, we would use it there. And that comes out in the movie Oppenheimer. And so through a series of discoveries, I think he works really on team building, because this is a complex process, and he was there to really help the construction of the plant to make sure it was safe. So the team building happened while he was doing this. So we had this whole interest in interpersonal team building in our family.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also where the field of family therapy is believed to have originated, in Oak Ridge with Carl Whitaker. And he was a psychiatrist there.
Okay.
Now, Dad and Carl Whitaker did not know each other, but everyone was really involved in the 1940s surrounding interpersonal relations, because they know how it can make things better and make things worse.
Now, I just got to say that at least one branch of it must have been, because like the Menninger Institute existed in the 30s in Kansas, maybe?
Yes.
And Lewin spoke there, and Murray Bowen was there, and Edwin Friedman. And so, of course, there were different sources of these things.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I think this would be the experiential branch of family therapy. That's what Carl Whitaker did.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very much into family of origin. So yes, you're right. It was in different places. In his book, The Family Crucible, he talks about Oak Ridge.
Okay.
It's by Napier, but it's about Carl Whitaker.
And Oak Ridge is in Tennessee,
Yes,
or
Oak
yeah.
Ridge is a national laboratory in
Right.
Tennessee, and there were three main labs working on the bomb: Hanford, Washington, and Los Alamos, and Oak Ridge.
Yeah, I've been to the other two.
Oh, okay. And so that that whole experience greatly affected Dad, and he really was opposed to dropping the bomb on
Mm-hmm.
Japan, and I think it affected his beliefs about science and behavior. That he always saw that we needed to be cautious about technology,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly because technology, in my point of view, runs ahead of our values and our body and our feelings and our
Sure.
behavior. And so it dramatically affected him. And as a result, I think it affected me and my work in looking at how technology influences our everyday life and how we can work with it constructively and minimize the destructiveness. I'm currently doing a lot of work with this surrounding screen time use in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the new unintended consequence of cell phone use, is how this can really mimic mental health disorders if you're using particular games that are violent or that are non-empathetic. And so it's it needs to be on the table when you go into mental health work, is not just what is your present problem, or what are your drugs and alcohol if you're using, suicide ideation, suicide attempts if you're using, but also screen time use.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Even
so
I would
so
think that would even apply to binging on violent TV and
oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, anytime you look at that. So growing up with him and growing up with my mother, who was very interested in culture and education, uh, that created a blend for me. But it's much bigger than me. When I look at this and look at, I have 14 living cousins. Uh, a good 7 of us, at least, are in social science and science.
Mm-hmm. And of course, two of my siblings are, as am
Yes.
I, and my son is went and got his PhD in physics. One of my sons.
Yes. And then on the Robertson side, my mother's side, we have 5 others. And I'm not even counting my daughters or their spouses.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we add this up, it would be an interesting interview to think about family of origin just with science, with interests within a family, and how it creates kind of a ripple effect. Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm adding up on both sides of my family 11 people that are professionally oriented, either in medicine, math, science, or therapy, or OD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it may even be more than you think, because there's
Yeah, that's
Louis
what I was
Free.
thinking. And so
Uh,
it provides kind of a think tank. It's just like when
sure.
you and I get together, or you and Chris and I get together, or I with your dad, you get this generative energy
Mm-hmm. Even your
talking.
recent conversation with my wife, who's new to the social sciences, but loves them. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of the fun thing about this. And I think I was thinking about this, of what links us together, and that is there's a permission to tell stories. And when you tell a story about yourself and your interests, it affects other people in your family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so strong, and strong for me on both sides of my family, as strong on the Crosby side as in the Robertson side, is a storytelling component that talks, this is what happened to me when I did this. This is what I did. This is what I found. This is what I discovered. And as a result of that, I was thinking about it. It's like it's sharing, but it's also about curiosity. It's basically saying, let's be curious together. I wonder. And that's the blessing of having people talk. And when I look at my cousins, like you and Chris, and then I have this whole Robertson connection, and then my in-laws, I think it's all linked through sharing what we're doing instead of just sitting around looking at each other.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You are, I think, a great storyteller. And so you already wove in a little story there about the way you look at things. And I'm wondering if you can sort of briefly touch on like neuroscience. Here you have TED Talks, including neuroscience and Star Wars. What Star Wars has to do with your brain.
Yes.
I think it'd be fun for people to hear a little of that kind of stuff if you're willing.
Oh, sure. I would be willing. Um, in, in around 2004, Portland State University started an interpersonal neurobiology certificate program, and I was one of 3 people to start that. And that was based on the work of Dan Siegel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was good timing because Dan Siegel's work really was very broad. It was like a liberal arts of brain science. It could be applied to business and education and therapy and the movies. So what I ended up doing later with this was a TED Talk on Star Wars and your brain, and looking at just basically when you're watching a movie, how does that affect your brain?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the ways to understand this is you're in this dreamlike world with a usually dimmer in the room or in the theater. And so it's like being inside your mind when you are watching a movie. So we have about, according to Ledoux, 100 times more emotional nerve pathways than cognitive nerve pathways. So we have to we just pick up on the emotions of this screen. So you remember where you were in where you watched Titanic and the emotions you had with the different characters, and you remember where you were if you saw The Wizard of Oz. And these emotional pathways really give us life.
I certainly remember where I was when I saw Star Wars for the first time.
Yes, and I do too. I was in San Diego. And now that is the parallel to that in therapy is you really remember the positive and the negatives. But sometimes if something is so negative, you don't want to remember it, like with abuse, for example. And so that is why some people, when they watch movies or they with trauma in their background, or that they meditate with their eyes shut or with not using a verbal meditation, can trigger unresolved trauma.
Yeah, because it's still there in the unconscious.
Yeah, that's right. So the other piece that I found interesting about movies is the hippocampus itself, the movies in the brain, that within 1/125th of a second after an event, you get an emotional memory yourself about that event if it triggers you. So that is really interesting. So like if you have a character like a character like Kevin Costner, for example, for the love of the game, who gets injured, you are injured yourself. You experience that injury when you're watching the game in a microsecond.
Sure, or when Darth Vader shows up.
Yes.
If you ever had a father.
Yes. Yes.
Then you're immediately projecting whatever your experience of fatherness is.
And that's the power of Darth Vader. And the Darth Vader piece really, and the Star Wars piece really ricochets with the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell and neuroscience, because it's about this adventure into the unknown, and we don't know where we're going, and we feel lost at times. And we're moving forward with that. And
the essence of leadership really also is to, if you're really heading someplace different and leading someplace different, you don't know what's going to happen.
That's really true. And I think that's an interesting piece, going back to our family history, is the emphasis for me on both sides of my family was really know yourself well enough so that you can lead. And that was on my mother's side as well as my dad's side. And then your dad took it really into social science quite a bit as a key theme in the Leadership Institute of Spokane that became the Leadership Institute of Seattle.
I just taught in the Leadership Institute of Seattle last week.
Oh, that's great. And did you teach about leadership?
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. We taught about, it was there was the final week of a 6-module certificate program, and so people graduated, but right to the end, they were learning about the connection between their family of origin experiences and their current beliefs and behaviors.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you are doing, you're keeping this alive in the family because it's now structured inside an educational certificate program. And that is quite exciting.
It is.
And then your dad really created a force field with it. And that's tying it in with Star Wars, because we have the concept of the Force. And I think the key thing I want to talk about with this is the spiritual blend, to me, outside of social science, is the glue of me. And that was in my mother's side as well as my father's side. It's certainly in your father. And it can come out in so many different expressions, but primarily I have seen it come out in service. And that's and if you approach this, approach helping and approach teaching as not a me phenomena, but a me and a we, you get something beyond yourself. And I think that's what has really helped me during my experience of blending teaching and therapy together. I've done probably teaching in educational institutions for close to 50 years, as well as doing therapy. And these two things intersect because they're part of the field of service.
And part of the spirituality is love.
Yes. And sharing and part of spirituality is whether you're in a tea group or a therapy session or an education setting or a business, it's having fairness and equity, but treating people with respect.
Yep.
And helping people get the things they need. And if they don't have the things they need, you might direct them to where they are or where they could get it if you can't provide it. But to me, I think my life would be very hollow without this larger spiritual connection. And as you age, it keeps on developing, I think. And it has 1,001 different forms. Like I have a cousin, I don't think you may have met back in the late 70s, Steve James. He is a naturalist for the state of Ohio who is a specialist in Johnny Appleseed. He's on my mother's side of the family.
Well, that sounds like a family member, all right.
Yeah, it does. He's also doing a solar eclipse, because a big solar eclipse education thing.
What's his name?
Steve James.
Okay, and he's in Ohio, and you can send me his contact.
Yeah, he's in Ohio, and his father was a minister, Howard. And Howard knew your father.
Well, we have a whole heap of ministers in our family history. So.
Yes, and you have it on your mother's side.
Yep, Grandpa Freeze, and who really helped me. He was. It's a history of loving pastors, who are just warm and inviting, and so it's. I think Christianity at its best.
Yeah, it's a really, it's interesting to have. I mean, I had an uncle on my mother's side, a Methodist minister, and then on my dad's side, my uncle, your brother, as a Methodist minister. And but they really practiced in two different areas of the country. And one, your dad was much more liberal than Howard James, too. So that was going on. But I do think when we talk about social science and the flow of it, even you have to bring in and explore the spiritual dimension of, to some extent, to just help understand where you are and with it. It's fascinating to me about William James. William James is the father of American psychology, and he was the president of the first psychology association, but he was also a ghost hunter. And so there's a historical book called Ghost Hunters, and his brother was Henry James, the famous novelist, poet.
Okay.
And so they would be talking about ghost hunting as he was also talking about building the field of psychology. But I think for him, it's just about being curious. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone go out and look for ghosts, but that is an interesting experience because it was very popular at the turn of the century, because of Gettysburg.
Well, if there was any place that would have a bunch of ghosts.
And they have a lot of ghost sightings. But why I brought him up is that he's just part of this. This is part of the social science phenomena, and it's kind of repressed from when we teach it in school. It doesn't go over that, but it's there.
Well, this reminds me of, right now I'm rereading the memoirs of Carl Jung. And Jung was very interested in and aware of phenomenon like that. So,
very, very much so. So I think the interesting thing is I remember with my father, I was 5 years old and I had to go on stage with my mother, who was pregnant with my sister at the time, and my dad in a United Brethren church to answer a family discussion with the congregation. Can a scientist be a Christian?
Okay.
And then they even asked me that. And my mother gave me things to play with, like a yo-yo up there, and things to draw. And I was playing with it. I said, of course. And but that was a serious concern at the time. That scientists would be atheists, and if you were atheist, then you would be a communist.
Right.
And that was in the early 50s. So I think it's important when we move into this social science arena is to get to know what is your comfortable spiritual practice, and find that out for yourself and how you can put that into your daily or weekly life.
That makes sense to me. It's more important than anything else, I think, in life. So, and the other thing that you just mentioned, like political beliefs and so on, and I'm really glad to be part of a social science of Lewin that has clarity about democracy and what's acceptable behavior in a democracy and what isn't. And so I feel like that's part of my mission also, is to help the world move in a better direction in my own small way. And that's part of my spiritual quest.
Oh, that's good. No, that's really good. And I think the lessons of Kurt Lewin and your book on Kurt Lewin really show a pathway that we need right now. It's very murky with appealing to authoritarianism right now.
Yep. And I was just thinking the other day that I a new paper, I think I'll write it, about the Civil War not being over, because I think we've had authoritarianism in this country since the beginning. We certainly did towards the Native Americans and then towards the blacks as they arrived. And we had a chance to change that after the Civil War, and we really failed. The authoritarianism was allowed to continue in the South, and it's still with us today. The inclination towards it. And so anyway, that's
good. And it's so good that you wrote this book on Kurt Lewin. I know that's really affected a lot of people, and you've been over to Germany talking about it.
Yeah, running tea groups with German social scientists.
That's excellent, Gil.
Yeah, it's exciting. Chris and I go back to do that in June.
So what is it like to keep your father's teachings alive and then adapting them so that you get your own signature on it?
Well, of course, I love it, Greg, and I love my father. I'm interviewing him tomorrow again. So, if the good Lord's willing, I mean, when I arranged to interview a 95-year-old, I don't want to move slowly.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. And he's amazing that he is doing what he is doing. I mean, he's the most active 95-year-old I personally know.
Yeah. He's very clear still, and we've written papers together recently, and so on. So, but it's interesting. Not Lewin, Jung. Jung's saying, "Well, I think I'm finishing my father's work." And generationally, the things that are undone get carried into the next generation. And I gotta say, I think there's truth to that for me with Dad. Like there's a concern about how many OD people want to have organizations that have no hierarchy. They've got their own authority issues, and so they want to have flat organizations as a solution, and they try to sell that and so on. And that was a rift that Dad never was able to resolve to his satisfaction. And so I'm probably still carrying on some of his incomplete work, even though his work is very complete in so many ways. But it's good. It's good to be carrying the generational torch.
Well, it is fun, and I feel, although I'm the first therapist I know in the family, and the first, and I was employed to teach in counseling psychology and sociology. I'm not sure there's another family member there, but I see my ripple effect is that all the people behind me in the past were interested in what I'm doing now. And the field wasn't just prominent enough to jump in. And then after that, other people are jumping in. I have other relatives who are therapists, and one's a psychiatrist, all on my mother's side of the family.
You've certainly influenced Chris and I, like around neuropsychology and so on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I do think the interesting piece and the gift I think your father has given all of us is this gift of longevity and clarity. And that he can recall the family history. And when he and I get together, we just talk about that.
Yeah, I have some faith in that since he's stayed clear, I have some faith that I will, even though Mom had Alzheimer's. But before we go, I'd love to just give a little bit more to the world here of these listeners about, like, you do things like speak at conferences where you're comparing the Amish and the Las Vegas culture. And of course, you're speaking internationally in China a lot and in Egypt about COVID and how the hero's journey, in managing COVID. And so can you give a little bit more of your wisdom?
Sure. I have about 25 different topics I can talk on and apply into therapy. And like Amish Vegas is about how technology and values affect a culture. And it's being aware of how to manage technology. Like even the Amish inside their church services have discussions about how to manage a use of technology before they implement it.
That makes sense that they would. I mean, here's Jung again, one lamenting the impact of radio and newspapers on making everything seem like it's a rush. Like you have to have the information, and
It,
taking from the world
yeah,
more than it's adding.
yeah, and so as speed increases, attention deficit traits increase with it.
That makes sense.
So the organization, I think, is much more. Many organizations have many more problems with attention deficit and organization than people do, because they're not pausing enough on how to implement a technology. And so when they implement a new software system, everyone gets dysregulated because there isn't enough preparation for it if they don't have the preparation.
I think that affects more than just technology implementation in organizations. It affects almost any kind of work, really.
It's true.
They're not giving it enough time and attention. And then Friedman called that quick fix mentality. They just keep putting bandages on things and then blaming the bandage.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why I think some of my work is really focused, a lot of it actually is focused on trying to maintain something over time. Mm-hmm. So I was just in a media conference. I was a keynote. It was an international media conference on movies, media, and mental health. And there were about 35 nations there. And one of the concerns from the demographics we see in the industry is bullying. And inside the entertainment industry, as well as high suicide rates. So then it's like when I present something, it isn't just to present it. It's like, how do we develop a system within your country or your regional area to deal with entertainers, to provide services for them? And so part of what I do, and I know that has been influenced by my mother, father, and specifically your father's work, is focusing on how to get an idea and bring it into action. Mm-hmm. And that is right at the heart of Kurt Lewin.
Sure.
So, like, I'm involved in a project of how to decrease bullying in specific countries for entertainers.
And who's bullying the entertainers? Is it
often the directors.
Okay.
It would be the business itself.
Mm-hmm. Producers.
Yeah, the producers. It's a culture.
That sounds like Hollywood also.
Yes, it is. It is. And we had a big meltdown with that, with Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
As a big example of that. So, yeah. So what I'm really trying to, like, my big thing with therapy when I'm training internationally and working with COVID, when I did that, and is you just can't approach this as I have a problem. You have to. Many people are other oriented. We are very me oriented. So if the motivation to change is for other people, take it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that is an important concept. Like with that, we lose people in America into therapy because we're wanting them to find their own motivation, for example, to change depression. But their motivation, maybe to change their own depression, is to help other people. And that is okay to accept that.
Absolutely. And you've done a lot of group therapy.
Yes.
And of course, that's also related to Lewin's theory that if peers influence each other, and if groups come to a conclusion like doing something to better yourself is going to help, then the individuals in the group are more likely to do it.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the things I like to do is add in a dimension of liberal arts into therapy. So that would allow, for example, puppetry, using puppets in parent training. It could use art in your therapy, working with your anxiety or depression, or music, and not just the verbal adage. So I'm about 25 years into the Incredible Years program at Morrison, which is evidence-based practice on parenting using puppets through the University of Washington School of Nursing.
Nice.
And that is cross-cultural. And so we get parents to change more easily if we hand them a puppet and they can practice role-playing, talking to a turtle puppet.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's fun. So yeah. I think where things are with therapy is we have to see that our technology, our methods in using therapy are more fluid than just words only.
Yeah, well, it helps if there's fun also.
Yes. Yeah, it's a huge component.
You've been a master of that, I think. So,
oh, thanks.
I mean, that might be your next book. As to the impact of fun on the brain, something like that.
Yeah, that's it. That's an interesting idea.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I've been thinking about using puppets in my videos. So, I'm working on another video course right now, and I thought about puppets and I forgot that. So this is a good reminder.
Yeah, they're an interesting piece, and also it gets very different if you're doing a hand puppet to a marionette.
Okay.
And I do think that marionettes have more more emotional features because you're really being manually manipulated with strings.
Mm-hmm.
And it can really make and generate negative feelings if they are there with systems and families, easier than hand puppets. I'd like to work with hand puppets because it frees a person easier.
Yeah, it sounds easier.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Hey, I think we're probably getting near the end of this.
Okay, that's fine by me.
Well, one big influence you had on my life was when you lived with us in Spokane, and I was. Well, what year do you think you got there?
I was there at the end of 1971.
Okay, so I was only 12, and that makes sense to me. I was, just in those tween years, and
yeah, that was fun. It was good being with you then.
Yeah, we went and saw Harold and Maude, and that was all you. I had no idea what I was doing or what I was getting into. But one thing that you helped me with fun, be interested in Margaret Mead and anthropology. With the Quackoodles and Mondougalmores. And you were walking around the house greeting us by saying Quackoodle. And, lifting your arm up I think sort of like it was a hand puppet, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Well, it was good, I mean, the Quackoodles are not that far away from us from Spokane.
Yeah, I was just reading about them recently. I have Margaret Mead's book again about those cultures, and
it's an interesting culture, but it was good sharing those experiences and just playing together and playing basketball and rod hockey and I was there because I was just getting settled, moving from Indiana,
right.
And I would help out with babysitting.
Yeah, softball too. You remember playing softball?
Yes.
Those were great games where we'd have you and Kim and Dave, the two older brothers out there fielding, and I was the oldest of the
Yeah,
young ones that would be trying to hit
yeah.
against you. Yeah.
And that's a unique, a unique connection. And I think one of the things that would be interesting is I have really benefited from my connections with my cousins
Mm-hmm.
and my aunts and uncles, and I do think that's just an important source in life. I know for some people it's very painful because abuse has been there,
Sure.
but for me, it's very positive. And what I like to continue to do is to stay in contact with all my cousins and all my aunts and uncles, and reach out to them. It's very important to me to do that. But we all have historical moments, like back in Spokane,
Yep.
where I really spent a lot of time with all five of you.
Yeah, you
All
certainly
five of
spent a
the
lot of
kids.
time with me. I didn't,
I know.
have any awareness of how much time you spent with anybody
Yeah,
else.
I did with everyone, but it was fun being with you, and that's part of our connection today.
Sure. And
That
it's
playtime.
that fun around anthropology definitely influenced my interest in social science. And do you know Margaret Mead was a good friend of Kurt Lewin's?
No,
Yeah,
really?
absolutely. She's the one that came up with the word group dynamics. They did a whole bunch of action research together, where on food habits, where she would teach one class like a lecturer, standard lecture, and basically no change would happen. And then she and Lewin would have the next class of it was women. They were trying to change food habits so that all the best food would go to the soldiers out on the front. And they would have the women talk to each other as a group and in pairs, and then those women would go out and implement like 80 or 90% of them would change what they were doing with food. But Margaret Mead was right there in the mix for years with Lewin. There's even a picture of Lewin and Margaret Mead riding horseback along the Grand Canyon,
Hmm.
and Lewin's in a suit.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, just hearing this, this is the reason to me of this podcast. It is the importance of cousins. And if you have a good relationship with a cousin, or have connected in the past, and you haven't been in contact with them, get in contact with them. Reach out to them, because they give to you and you give to them. It isn't just about sharing social science, it's sharing your family memories from a different perspective.
Yep.
And I really have stayed in touch with most of my cousins, but one of them I had not seen for 60 years, and I recently did, and it was a fabulous encounter in Washington, D.C., and he's in science. That's Jeff, and he is involved in the space station, the softwares of the space stations.
Nice, just like your father.
Yeah, and my father and he would do things together with his father, who was an educator, but he was also an Air Force general. And he was your father. Jeff's father was your father's roommate for 2 years in Otterbein.
Okay.
That's how it's all linked.
Right.
And I wouldn't have known that had I not dug around and interviewed your dad.
Uh-huh.
And it's just important to stay in touch if the family members are safe and healthy. That no trauma has happened to you with a family member.
Sure.
And you need to protect yourself. That it enriches your life.
There's ways to approach understanding and learning about yourself from the family, even when there has been trauma. And
Yes, absolutely.
that's actually my next podcast. I'm going to use interview questions, which I can provide to anybody, to do an interview of my father, who is a very receptive interviewee. So it's not like it's a I'm not afraid of talking to my father by any means, but people can heal themselves if they're willing to learn about their family in a new way.
Yeah, that's true. And you could do it yourself or you could do it with a third party.
Yep.
And part of what we do is in therapy is to help guide a person of how they can do that without decompensating to the point of really risking themselves.
It's
But
important to have a mentor or a
yes,
helper.
yes, and many people can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important not to talk about it with someone, and you can really face
Sure.
family trauma. When I was talking about that, I was just being protective of just going in and saying you're going to be talking to the relative that abused you that you haven't talked to since the abuse.
I agree, Greg, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. So that's where I was going with it. But
But
I really think we're missing too many links in our family right now, not
mhm.
in general. And I'm there's one cousin who spent time with me out here for 4 or 5 years. I haven't got together with. He lives in Reading, and he's an occupational therapist.
Okay.
And so I'm planning to see him in March.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
that's
yeah.
your good motivation for me to figure out who I'm out of touch with. So I
So,
appreciate it.
and that hasn't been 60 years. That's been 40 years, I think,
Okay.
since I've
Okay.
seen him. And that's what happens when we go across country. But this is a good way to connect. And I appreciate you doing this.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it's been a pleasure. And I think we're at the end.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. And that is officially a wrap. Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. It's many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Again, the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris, and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day and invite you to.